Captain Lee Jiho stepped off the transport shuttle and looked around the massive docking bay of Nexus Prime Station. The air smelled different here, like metal and something he could not name. Dozens of alien species moved around him, some walking, on two legs like humans, others floating or crawling. Their uniforms showed ranks and symbols from across the galaxy. This was the Galactic Military Academy, the most important war school in known space. Lee carried only a small bag and wore the simple gray uniform of the Earth Defense Force. Many aliens stared at him as he walked through the corridors. Some pointed and whispered to each other. He was one of only 3 humans ever allowed to study here. The other 2 had failed and gone home within weeks. Lee planned to be different. The academy building was huge beyond anything on Earth. Walls stretched up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Floating platforms carried students between levels. Holographic displays showed star maps and battle simulations everywhere he looked. This place trained officers who would command fleets of 1,000 ships. Lee had never seen so much as 100 ships together in his entire career. A tall reptilian being approached him. Its scales were dark green, and its eyes were yellow like a snake. "You must be the human," it said in perfect English. "I am Instructor Vextar. You will attend my Advanced Warfare Strategy class starting tomorrow morning. Do not be late." Lee nodded. "Yes, sir. I look forward to learning from you." Vextar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Learning. Yes, I suppose you will learn many things here, things about how real warfare is conducted by civilized species." The instructor walked away without another word. The next morning, Lee found himself in a lecture hall that could hold 500 students. Most seats were filled with aliens of every type he had ever seen, and many he had not. Near the back, he spotted another human. She was young, maybe 22 years old, with short black hair and serious eyes. She sat alone with a tablet computer in front of her. Vextar entered the room, and the talking stopped immediately. "Today, we begin our study of primitive warfare. Concepts," he announced. "I will show you examples of crude thinking from species that have not yet learned proper military science. These examples will help you understand why such methods fail against advanced tactics." A holographic display appeared above the instructor's head. It showed a document written in English with diagrams of soldiers and weapons. Lee recognized it immediately as a standard Earth Defense Force tactical manual. "Observe this specimen. From the recently contacted human species," Vextar said. The display zoomed in on a section about infantry tactics. "They actually advocate for something called combined arms, where different weapon types work together. How wasteful and inefficient compared to proper plasma bombardment." Several students laughed. A blue-skinned alien raised its hand. "Instructor, why would they use such complicated methods when a single orbital strike could eliminate any ground target?" "Exactly the question a civilized mind would ask," Vextar replied. "Humans still think in terms of ground combat and personal weapons. They have not evolved beyond the need for soldiers to physically occupy territory." The display changed to show diagrams of human machine gun positions. "Look at this concept they call suppressive fire. They actually plan to waste ammunition, to keep enemies from moving, rather than simply destroying them with precise energy weapons. The inefficiency is remarkable." More laughter filled the room. Lee watched the young human woman in the back. She was writing notes on her tablet, but she did not look embarrassed or angry. Her face showed no emotion at all. "Here we see their doctrine of acceptable casualties," Vextar continued. "They actually plan for their own forces to die in significant numbers. No rational species would accept such losses when proper tactics could avoid them entirely." A red-scaled alien student spoke up. "How many casualties do they consider acceptable, Instructor?" The document suggests 10 to 15% in most scenarios, Vextar answered. "Some situations mention up to 30%. It is difficult to believe any commander would sacrifice so many of his own forces." The room buzzed with shocked whispers. In galactic warfare, losing even 2% of forces meant immediate retreat, and was considered a terrible defeat. The idea of planning to lose 15% seemed impossible to most students. Lee noticed the human woman was still writing. Her stylus moved quickly across her tablet screen, adding notes in what looked like Korean characters. She seemed to be making calculations or corrections to the material being displayed. Perhaps most primitive of all, Vextar said, is their concept of asymmetric warfare. They actually plan to fight enemies who are stronger than they are, using what they call unconventional tactics. A civilized species would simply avoid such conflicts or seek diplomatic solutions. The instructor brought up more documents showing human battle plans. Notice how much detail they put into scenarios where they are outnumbered or outgunned. They seem to expect this as a normal condition rather than a reason to withdraw. A floating, jellyfish-like alien pulsed its lights in what Lee knew was laughter. Do they actually fight battles they cannot win? Apparently so, Vextar replied. Their historical records show numerous conflicts where they continued fighting despite obvious disadvantages. It suggests either poor judgment or an inability to perform rational cost analysis. Lee watched as more human tactical documents appeared on the display. These covered urban warfare, guerrilla tactics, and siege defense. Each one showed careful planning for situations that galactic military doctrine said should never happen. Why would anyone fight in cities when orbital bombardment was available? Why plan for years-long sieges when negotiation was always an option? The human woman kept writing notes. Her tablet screen was covered with small Korean text now, dense paragraphs of what looked like comments and corrections. She wrote with the speed of someone who knew this material well. Their equipment design philosophy is equally primitive, Vextar continued. Human weapons are built to function in terrible conditions rather than being properly maintained in controlled environments. They actually expect their tools to be used until they break. An insect-like alien clicked its mandibles. Why not simply avoid situations where equipment might be damaged? An excellent question that shows proper military thinking, the instructor praised. Humans seem unable to conceive of warfare that does not involve destruction of their own resources. The class continued for 2 hours. Vextar showed document after document from Earth's military archives, each one treated as an example of backward thinking. The alien students laughed and made comments about how grateful they were to belong to civilized species that had evolved beyond such crude methods. Lee said nothing during the entire class. He watched and listened and remembered every word. This was why he was here, to understand how other species viewed human capabilities. The information would be valuable when he returned to Earth. As the class ended, students began filing out of the lecture hall. The human woman stayed in her seat, still writing on her tablet. Her stylus moved steadily as she added more notes to whatever she had been working on. Vextar noticed her as he gathered his teaching materials. "Cadet," he called out. "You are the other human student, are you not?" The woman looked up. "Yes, sir, Cadet Shinbora, Earth Defense Force Academy. I observed you taking extensive notes during my lecture," Vextar said. "What could you possibly be adding to perfect tactical analysis from advanced military science?" Shinbora's expression did not change. "Just making some corrections and clarifications, sir." "Corrections?" Vexatar's yellow eyes narrowed. "What corrections could a human possibly make to superior galactic doctrine? Would you like to see?" Bora asked. She held out her tablet toward the instructor. Vexatar approached and took the device. His eyes scanned the screen for several seconds. His expression changed from amusement to confusion to something that might have been concern. "What are these numbers?" he asked quietly. "Historical data, sir," Bora replied. "Kill counts, casualty figures, battle durations. I thought it might be helpful to include actual results from when these tactics were used." Lee moved closer, curious about what had caught the instructor's attention. On Bora's tablet screen, he could see the same tactical diagrams from the lecture, but now they were covered with small Korean text and numbers. Vextar's voice was very quiet when he spoke again. "These numbers cannot be correct." "Which ones, sir?" "This notation here next to the machine gun emplacement diagram. It says, Somme, first day, 60,000 casualties. That cannot refer to a real battle." Bora looked at the screen. "Oh yes, that was the Battle of the Somme in 1916. British forces took about 60,000 casualties on the first day of fighting. The battle lasted 4 months total." Vexatar stared at her. 60,000 casualties in 1 day of fighting, for both sides combined? "No, sir, just for the British." Total casualties for both sides during the entire battle were over 1 million. The instructor's scaled hands trembled slightly as he held the tablet. This must be a typographical error. No, sir. Would you like me to show you the documentation? Earth keeps very detailed records of all our major conflicts. Lee watched Vextar's face change as the implications began to sink in. Vextar sat in his office staring at Cadet Shinbora's tablet. The device lay on his desk like a dangerous weapon. For 3 hours he had been reading through her annotations, and each page made him more disturbed than the last. Next to a diagram showing basic infantry squad movements, Bora had written Stalingrad 1942-1943, 2 million total casualties, urban combat lasted 5 months. Beside a section on defensive positions, her notes read, Verdun 1916, 700,000 casualties, battle lasted 10 months for minimal territorial gain. These could not be real numbers. No species fought battles with millions of casualties. No rational commander would continue a fight for 10 months over a few miles of ground. Yet Bora had provided reference codes for each notation, suggesting documentation existed to support her claims. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his office. Come, Vextar called. The door slid open and Cadet Rixmore entered. The young warrior belonged to the Cathani species, renowned throughout the galaxy for their military prowess. His people had conquered 12 star systems through superior tactics and courage. Among galactic military circles, the Cathani were considered the finest soldiers in known space. Instructor, I wanted to ask about today's lecture, Rixmore said. Some of the human tactical concepts seemed more sophisticated than you initially presented. Vexatar looked up from the tablet. What do you mean? The combined arms doctrine. For example, when I reviewed it later, the integration of different weapon systems showed considerable tactical complexity. Their planning for multiple contingencies was quite thorough. It is still primitive compared to proper galactic methods, Vextar insisted, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Perhaps, Rixmore agreed. But I was curious about something. The human cadet mentioned casualty figures during your discussion. Were those numbers accurate? Vexatar hesitated. I am still investigating that matter. I ask because my grandfather fought in the Cathani conquest of the Mordak system. It was our largest military campaign in recent history. We suffered 847 casualties over 6 months of fighting, and our high command considered those losses nearly unacceptable. If the human numbers are real, yes. Then they routinely fight battles that would destroy any Cathani army 10 times. Over. That suggests either incredible foolishness or incredible toughness. After Rixmore left, Vextar activated his communication console. He needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. The screen flickered to life, showing the communication center of the Academy. Connect me to Admiral Park Dong-Yun of the Earth Defense Force, he requested. The technician's eyes widened. Sir, that will require going through diplomatic channels. Human military command does not typically accept direct contact from mark it as urgent academic inquiry. Tell them it concerns the accuracy of historical military data provided by their exchange students. 20 minutes later, Admiral Park's face appeared on Vextar's screen. The human looked to be in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. Behind him, Vextar could see what appeared to be a military command center with dozens of personnel working at various stations. Instructor Vextar, I understand you have questions about our military history, Admiral Park said without preamble. Yes, Admiral. One of your cadets has provided what appear to be casualty figures from historical human conflicts. The numbers seem impossibly high. Which battles? Vextar consulted the tablet. The Somme, Stalingrad, Verdun, Gettysburg, Chosin Reservoir. She lists casualty figures in the hundreds of thousands or millions. Admiral Park nodded. Those numbers are accurate. Is there a specific concern? Admiral, the Battle of the Somme is listed as having over 1 million total casualties. That is more military personnel than most galactic species possess in their entire space force. The Somme was fought between Earth nations using early 20th century technology. Infantry advances against machine gun positions and artillery, not our most efficient period, tactically speaking. Vextar felt his stomach turn. You describe losing 1 million soldiers as inefficient rather than catastrophic? Catastrophic would be losing the war, Admiral Park replied calmly. The Somme was one battle in a 4-year global conflict. We learned from it and adapted our tactics. 4 years? The First World War lasted 4 years? Yes. The Second World War lasted 6 years and involved most of Earth's population. Casualty estimates range from 70 to 85 million dead, including civilians. The tablet slipped from Vextar's hands and clattered onto his desk. 85 million casualties in a single war? That was our largest conflict to date, Admiral Park confirmed, though the total death toll from human warfare throughout history is significantly higher. Our species has never experienced true peace for more than a few decades at a time. Vexatar struggled to process this information. The entire Galactic Alliance had perhaps 100 million military personnel spread across hundreds of worlds. Humans had apparently killed almost that many of each other in just one war. Admiral, how does your species recover from such losses? We rebuild. We have children. We remember the lessons and try to avoid repeating the worst mistakes. But conflict seems to be part of human nature. We have been fighting organized wars for over 5,000 years of recorded history. 5,000 years of continuous warfare? With brief peaceful periods, yes. Our cadet's annotations probably only cover the major conflicts. She would need several tablets to document every human war. Vextar looked down at Bora's notes again. Beside a section on siege warfare, she had written, Leningrad 872 days, 1.5 million civilian deaths, city never surrendered. Below that, Stalingrad acceptable loss rate, 15 to 30% per week, considered sustainable for urban combat operations. Admiral, these loss rates. How does your military command function when you expect to lose 15 to 30% of forces? Per week? Those are extreme examples from desperate situations, Admiral Park replied. But human commanders train to make difficult decisions about acceptable losses. Sometimes tactical objectives require sacrifices that other species might consider excessive. What do you consider excessive? Admiral Park was quiet for a moment. Total annihilation of our forces with no strategic gain. Even then, if the sacrifice served a larger purpose. Human history includes many examples of units fighting to the last person to buy time for reinforcements or civilian evacuations. 2. The last person? Your soldiers fight until they all die? When necessary. We call them last stands. They are often remembered as our greatest military achievements. Vextar's communication console chimed with an incoming priority message. Admiral, I may need to contact you again soon. This information raises significant questions about our current tactical assessments. Of course. I should mention that. Cadet Shin Bora comes from a military family. Her great-grandfather served in the Korean War, her grandfather in Vietnam, and her father in the Middle East conflicts. She grew up hearing these stories. To her, they are family history rather than abstract tactical studies. After Admiral Park disconnected, Vextar sat alone in his office, trying to understand what he had learned. Humans did not just study warfare as an academic subject. They lived it, breathed it, passed down combat experience through generations. Like other species, shared recipes or cultural traditions. He picked up Bora's tablet again and scrolled through more annotations. Next to a section on guerrilla warfare, she had noted Vietnam 1965-1975, asymmetric conflict, conventional forces versus irregular tactics, 58,000 American dead, estimated 2.3 million total casualties. Below that, Afghanistan 2001 to 2021, occupation and counterinsurgency, 20-year commitment, acceptable loss rates maintained throughout deployment. 20 years. Humans had fought in Afghanistan for 20 years. The longest military campaign in galactic history had lasted 8 months, and it was considered an epic struggle that songs were still sung about. Vextar realized he needed to completely revise his understanding of human capabilities. What he had been teaching as primitive tactics were actually methods developed by a species that had fought more wars than the rest of the galaxy combined. Their crude doctrine was not the result of poor thinking, but of extensive, bitter experience. His door chimed again. Come, he called. Cadet Rixmore entered, this time accompanied by 3 other students representing different species. Instructor, we have been discussing today's lecture. Several of us have questions about the human tactical manual you showed us. What kind of questions? A tall, thin alien with blue skin spoke up. We calculated the resource requirements for the defensive positions shown in their siege warfare section. The ammunition, food, and medical supplies needed suggest they plan to defend locations for months or years rather than days or weeks. That is correct, Vextar confirmed reluctantly. But, sir, Rixmore added, that level of commitment would tie up enormous military assets. No rational commander would invest so heavily in fixed defensive positions. Vextar looked at them all carefully. What if I told you that humans have successfully defended cities under siege for over 2 years, while completely surrounded by enemy forces? The students exchanged glances. That would be impossible, the blue-skinned alien said. No population could survive that long without resupply. The city of Leningrad was besieged for 872 days during Human World War II. Over 1 million civilians died, mostly from General Kethron read Vextar's report 3 times before calling an emergency meeting. As Commandant of the Galactic Military Academy, he had overseen the training of officers from 47 different species over the past 20 years. Never had he received a report suggesting that their fundamental understanding of warfare might be completely wrong. The meeting convened in the Academy's primary briefing room. Present were Vextar, Captain Li Jiho, General Kethron himself, and 3 senior military advisors representing the major galactic powers. Cadet Shin Bora sat quietly in the corner, her tablet ready. Captain Li, General Kethran began, Instructor Vextar has raised concerns about our assessment of human military capabilities. He suggests that what we have characterized as primitive tactics may actually represent advanced warfare doctrine. Li nodded. That is possible, General. Human military development has followed a different path than most galactic species. Demonstrate, Kethran said simply. Li stood and approached the holographic display console. What type of demonstration would be most useful? Show us a human battle. Use our tactical simulation system to recreate one of your historical engagements. We will observe and provide analysis. Li considered this request carefully. Most human battles would be difficult for galactic observers to understand because the strategic context was so different. He needed something that would illustrate human tactical thinking without being too overwhelming. I will show you the Battle of Chosin Reservoir from the Korean War 1950, Li announced. It represents typical human combat operations under difficult conditions. He began entering parameters into the simulation system. The holographic display showed a mountainous region covered with snow. The tactical situation: 30,000 Chinese forces have surrounded 15,000 United Nations troops, primarily American and British. The surrounded forces are ordered to advance through enemy territory to reach the coast. Admiral Zethok, the hegemony military advisor, raised a tentacle. Captain, those numbers suggest the surrounded forces are outnumbered 2 to 1. Standard doctrine would be to request immediate evacuation or surrender. Yes. That would be the logical approach, Li agreed. However, human commanders decided to fight their way out while maintaining combat effectiveness. Fight their way out? General Kethron sounded puzzled. Through a force twice their size? Yes, sir. The temperature was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Weapons frequently froze and became inoperable. Medical evacuation was impossible due to weather. Food and ammunition were limited. The alien officers looked at each other with growing confusion. Li continued entering data into the simulation. The engagement lasted 17 days. Human forces advanced 78 miles through enemy-controlled territory while carrying their wounded and maintaining unit cohesion. Commander Veltar, representing the Crystalline Collective, spoke up. Captain, you describe an impossible military scenario. No force could maintain combat operations under those conditions. Nevertheless, it happened, Li replied calmly. Would you like to run the simulation? The holographic display activated, showing detailed terrain maps and unit positions. Li began the tactical recreation, explaining human decision-making as the battle progressed. Day 1. Chinese forces attack from 3 directions simultaneously. Human commanders establish defensive perimeters and begin organized withdrawal toward the coast. Withdrawal? Admiral Zethok interrupted. Earlier you said they advanced. Advancing withdrawal, Li clarified. Human military doctrine includes concepts for fighting in multiple directions while moving towards strategic objectives. The simulation showed human units forming defensive lines, holding positions until other units could move, then leapfrogging backward, while maintaining continuous fire on pursuing enemies. Day 3. Casualties reach 8%, Lee continued. Galactic Doctrine would call for immediate retreat, but human commanders consider this acceptable for current tactical situation. General Kethron watched the simulation with growing alarm. Captain, 8% casualties would trigger emergency protocols in any civilized military. How can human commanders continue operations with such losses? Human military training includes extensive preparation for high-casualty environments, Lee explained. Officers learn to function effectively even when losing significant numbers of personnel. The simulation continued. By day 7, human casualties had reached 15%, but the units maintained their formation and continued fighting. Several alien officers requested breaks to consult with their medical staff about the psychological effects of witnessing such sustained combat. Day 10. Weather conditions worsen, Lee narrated. Temperature drops to -50 degrees. Frostbite becomes a major factor. Medical supplies are exhausted. Human forces continue advance toward objective. Commander Veltar's crystalline structure was flickering rapidly, indicating extreme stress. Captain, this is not warfare. This is a prolonged suicide mission. No, sir. It is human standard operating procedure for difficult tactical situations. The simulation reached day 14. Human casualties were approaching 25%, but the surviving forces had fought through 2/3 of the distance to their objective. They had also inflicted disproportionate losses on the Chinese forces attempting to stop them. How are they maintaining morale? Admiral Zethok asked. No military force can sustain effectiveness after losing 1/4 of its personnel. Human soldiers are trained differently than galactic forces, Lee replied. They expect high casualties in serious combat. It does not surprise or demoralize them the way it would affect other species. Lieutenant Kim Taman appeared on the communication screen, joining the briefing from Earth Command. General Kethron, Captain Lee asked me to provide technical context for this demonstration. Lieutenant, how does human military training differ from galactic standards? Kethron asked. We assume worst-case scenarios as normal operating conditions, Kim replied. Human soldiers train to fight while wounded, to operate equipment that is damaged, and to complete missions even when cut off from support. Other species seem to train for ideal conditions that rarely exist in actual combat. Cadet An Soyoung entered the briefing room carrying several human military manuals. General, I brought some technical documentation that might help explain our equipment philosophy. She placed the manuals on the table and opened one to a section on weapons maintenance. Human military equipment is designed with the assumption that it will be used until it breaks. We calculate mean time between failures rather than optimal preservation schedules. Admiral Zethok examined the manual. These maintenance intervals assume continuous use in hostile conditions. Most galactic equipment would be considered unreliable if it required such frequent service. Our equipment is built to function reliably. Under those conditions, Soyoung explained, we expect to use weapons in mud, sand, extreme cold, and extreme heat. Galactic weapons seem to be designed for controlled environments. The simulation reached its conclusion. After 17 days of continuous combat, the human forces reached their objective at the coast. Total casualties were 38%, but the surviving units were still combat effective and had successfully completed their mission. The briefing room was silent for several minutes. Finally, General Kethran spoke. Captain Lee, in galactic military history, we have no examples of forces sustaining such casualties and continuing to fight effectively. What is your normal casualty threshold before units become combat ineffective? Lee asked. 5% for regular forces, 8% for elite units, Kethran replied. Beyond that, morale collapse makes continued operations impossible. Human forces routinely operate effectively with casualty rates 3 to 4 times higher than your elite threshold, Lee observed. This suggests fundamental differences in military psychology and training methods. Commander Veltar was reviewing data from the simulation. Captain, the tactical decisions made by human commanders during this battle, they repeatedly chose options that maximized damage to enemy forces rather than minimizing their own losses. Yes, that is standard human tactical thinking. But that suggests your commanders value mission completion over personnel survival. When necessary, yes. Human military culture includes concepts like acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. Sometimes tactical objectives require decisions that other species might find difficult to make. Lieutenant Kim added context from his position on the communication screen. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir is considered a moderate example of human combat operations. We have many documented engagements with higher casualty rates and longer duration. Admiral Zethok's tentacles were moving in agitation. Higher casualty rates? Captain Lee, what does your species consider an extreme combat scenario? Lee exchanged glances with Cadet Bora. She looked up from her tablet and spoke for the first time during the briefing. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted 5 months with over 2 million total casualties, she said quietly. Both sides fought until they ran out of buildings to hide in. The city was completely destroyed, but neither side would surrender. 2 million? General Kethran's voice was barely audible. Urban combat, Lee explained. House-to-house fighting with no clear front lines. The emergency alert had interrupted their briefing, but General Kethran insisted on continuing the discussion of human warfare capabilities. With a real threat approaching, understanding human military methods had become urgent rather than academic. Before we address the immediate crisis, Kethran announced, I want to hear more about human warfare history. Captain Lee, can you arrange for an expert to brief us? Lee activated his communication device. Professor Yoon Minho is available from Earth, University Military History Department. He specializes in conflict escalation patterns. Minutes later, Professor Yoon's image appeared on the holographic display. He was an older man with gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had spent decades studying humanity's most violent periods. General Kethran, Captain Lee has briefed me on your situation, Yoon began. I understand you need to understand human warfare capabilities quickly. Professor, we have learned that humans fight battles with casualty rates that would destroy any galactic military force. How is this possible? Human warfare evolved differently than galactic conflict, Yoon replied. We developed on a single planet with limited resources and many competing groups. Warfare was often a matter of survival rather than policy. Dr. Cho Yoonji joined the transmission from her office at Seoul National University. I study xenopsychology, specifically how different species approach violent conflict. Humans have psychological adaptations that most galactic species lack. What kind of adaptations? Asked Commander Veltar. We can continue functioning effectively even while experiencing severe losses, Dr. Cho explained. Most species have biological responses that force retreat when casualties reach certain levels. Humans can override these responses when necessary. Professor Yoon activated a historical display showing human conflict data over time. Let me walk you through human warfare development to give you context. The display showed early human tribal conflicts. Paleolithic warfare typically involved 30 to 50% casualty rates, Yoon began. This was normal for small-scale conflicts between hunter-gatherer groups. Admiral Zethok's tentacles curled in distress. 50% casualties were considered. Normal? For early humans, yes. Resources were limited, so conflicts over territory or food were often life-or-death struggles. Groups that could not fight effectively simply did not survive. The display moved forward in time, showing larger conflicts as human civilization developed. Medieval warfare maintained high casualty expectations, Yoon continued. Siege warfare could last for years, with defenders choosing death over surrender. Why would they not negotiate? General Kethran asked. Because surrender often meant slavery, execution, or cultural destruction, Yoon replied. Humans learned that sometimes fighting to the death was the only way to protect what they valued. Dr. Cho added psychological context. Human emotional responses to extreme situations include what we call fight-or-flight reactions. But humans also developed a third option, fight until death. This response activates when retreat would mean destruction of family or community. The historical display showed European wars of the 16th and 17th centuries. Religious and ideological conflicts introduced new levels of intensity, Yoon explained. Humans began fighting wars over abstract concepts rather than just territory or resources. Abstract concepts? Commander Veltar seemed confused. Ideas about how society should be organized, what gods to worship, what political systems to use. Humans will fight and die for concepts that have no physical existence. The alien officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Fighting for ideas seemed to be a uniquely human characteristic. The 30 Years' War killed approximately 8 million people over religious differences, Yoon continued. Both sides continued, fighting even when the original causes were forgotten, because stopping would have meant admitting that previous sacrifices were meaningless. Dr. Cho explained the psychology behind this behavior. Humans have cognitive mechanisms that make it difficult to abandon costly commitments. The more we sacrifice for a goal, the more important that goal becomes to us. This can lead to conflicts that continue far beyond rational stopping points. The display moved to 19th century warfare. Industrial technology increased the scale and deadliness of human conflicts dramatically, Yoon said. The American Civil War lasted 4 years and killed over 600,000 people. 600,000 deaths over internal political differences. Admiral Zethok sounded horrified. The conflict was about slavery and states' rights, Yoon replied. Both sides considered these issues important enough to risk national destruction. Did they not attempt diplomatic solutions? Negotiations continued throughout the war, Dr. Cho answered. But humans often prefer decisive military victory over compromise, especially when core values are involved. Partial solutions to fundamental disagreements are psychologically unsatisfying. The historical display reached the 20th century, and the images became more disturbing. This period represents the peak of human warfare intensity, Yoon announced. World War I involved 65 million military personnel from multiple continents. Professor Yoon showed battle footage from Verdun, the Somme, and Passchendaele. Single battles lasted months and produced casualty lists longer than most galactic species' entire populations. How did human societies function while sustaining such losses? General Kethron asked. We mobilized our entire civilizations for warfare, Yoon replied. Total war became normal. Civilian populations accepted rationing, worked in weapons factories, and sent their children to fight. Everyone contributed to the war effort. Dr. Cho provided psychological analysis. Humans have social bonding mechanisms that allow us to make extreme sacrifices for group survival. Individual death becomes acceptable if it serves the larger community. The display showed World War II battles across multiple theaters of operation. The Second World War was even larger in scope, Yoon continued. Fighting occurred on every continent and involved virtually every human nation. How many casualties? Commander Veltar asked quietly. Military deaths are estimated at 21 to 25 million. Civilian deaths ranged from 50 to 60 million. Total casualties approached 85 million people. The briefing room fell silent. Even after their earlier discussions, the scale of human warfare continued to shock the alien observers. 85 million deaths, General Kethran repeated slowly. That is larger than the combined population of the 3 major galactic powers. Yes, Yoon confirmed, and this was just one war among thousands in human history. Commander Nithek, the Academy's security chief, had been listening to the briefing, while monitoring the approaching Devakri fleet. Professor, how do human military commanders make decisions when facing such enormous potential losses? Human command training includes extensive preparation for worst-case scenarios, Dr. Cho replied. We train officers to function effectively, even when facing the possible destruction of their entire force. What psychological mechanisms allow this? Nithek asked. Compartmentalization, focus on immediate tactical objectives, and acceptance of outcomes beyond personal control, Dr. Cho explained. Human commanders learn to make decisions based on strategic necessity rather than emotional comfort. The historical display moved to modern conflicts. Late 20th and early 21st century warfare showed humans adapting to new technologies while maintaining traditional willingness to accept casualties, Yoon said. The Korean War, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and dozens of smaller conflicts demonstrated that humans continue to fight lengthy campaigns even when victory is uncertain. Admiral Zethok was reviewing data on his personal display. Professor, I am calculating resource requirements for the conflicts you have described. The economic cost must have been enormous. Human societies regularly spend 20 to 40% of their total economic output on warfare during major conflicts, Yoon replied. We consider this normal rather than exceptional. 40% of total economic production devoted to warfare? Admiral Zethok sounded incredulous. Most galactic species spend less than 2% on military expenses during peacetime. Humans maintain significant military capabilities even during peaceful periods, Dr. Cho added. We assume that warfare is always possible, so we prepare continuously. General Kethron was studying the human warfare timeline. Professor, this data suggests that humans have never experienced genuine peace. Even periods without major wars included smaller conflicts and military preparations. That is correct, General. The longest period without significant warfare in human history was approximately 30 years. We consider this unusual rather than normal. Commander Nithek activated an urgent communication channel. General, the Devakri fleet has accelerated their approach. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Kethran looked at the human representatives. Based on what we have learned, how would human forces respond to this situation? Captain Lee answered immediately. We would prepare for extended siege operations, calculate acceptable casualty rates for various defensive scenarios, and begin psychological preparation for worst-case outcomes. What would you consider worst case? Total destruction of the station with maximum damage inflicted on attacking forces, Lee replied calmly. The alien officers stared at him. 3 hours remained before the Devakri fleet would arrive at Nexus Prime Station. Captain Lee Jiho stood in the primary command center surrounded by alien officers who were learning to implement human warfare doctrine for the first time in their lives. Major Bei Seojin is inbound with human reinforcements, Lee announced as he coordinated defensive preparations. ETA 40 minutes. They are bringing specialized equipment for extended siege operations. General Kethron watched Lee work with growing amazement. The human officer moved between tactical displays with calm efficiency, making decisions that would have required committee meetings in galactic military culture. Captain, you have authorized explosive charges throughout 17 sections of the station, Commander Nithek reported. If those detonate, we will lose nearly 30% of our facilities. Acceptable, Lee replied without hesitation. Those sections are designed to channel enemy forces into prepared kill zones. Trading space for tactical advantage is standard human doctrine. Admiral Zethok's tentacles writhed in distress. Captain, you are planning to deliberately destroy parts of our own station? Only if tactically necessary, Lee confirmed. Human defensive strategy assumes that territory may need to be sacrificed to inflict maximum casualties on attacking forces. Cadet Shin Bora was coordinating supply distribution according to human siege protocols. Captain, ammunition reserves are positioned for sustained combat operations. Medical stations are prepared for casualty rates up to 40%. 40%? Commander Veltar nearly dropped his datapad. You expect to lose 40% of our defenders? That is our contingency planning threshold, Bora replied calmly. Human forces remain combat effective at that casualty level. We hope to do better, but we prepare for realistic scenarios. Major Bao? Bei Seojin's transport docked precisely on schedule. Within minutes, human combat engineers were installing equipment throughout the station that the alien defenders had never seen before. Major, what is that device? General Kethran pointed to a complex electronic unit being mounted near the main entrance. Remote detonation system for sector isolation charges, Major Bei replied. If the Devakri breach our outer defenses, we can seal off compromised sections and force them to fight room by room for every meter of station territory. You would trap your own forces in those sections, if necessary. Human soldiers understand that mission completion sometimes requires personal sacrifice. Instructor Vextar approached Lee with a tactical question. Captain, our defensive plan shows fallback positions through 7 different station levels. Each position is designed to be abandoned after inflicting specific casualty levels on attacking forces. Correct. Defense in depth with planned withdrawal to successive positions. Each level costs the enemy more resources while preserving our remaining combat capability. But this plan accepts the loss of most of the station, Vextar pointed out. Physical. Infrastructure can be rebuilt, Lee replied. Trained personnel are more difficult to replace. Human doctrine prioritizes preserving combat effectiveness over preserving territory. The Devakri fleet appeared on long-range sensors exactly when predicted. 12 heavy cruisers and 30 escort vessels approached the station in standard Galactic assault formation. They are following conventional attack doctrine, Major Bay observed. Massed approach with overwhelming firepower designed to force immediate surrender. Have they attempted communication? Lee asked. Standard surrender demand transmitted 10 minutes ago, Commander Nithek reported. They offer safe passage for all personnel if we abandon the station immediately. General Kethron looked at Lee. In galactic warfare, this would be considered a reasonable offer. Our defensive force is significantly outnumbered. Human response to surrender demands depends on strategic considerations rather than tactical odds, Lee replied. Do we have strategic reasons to hold this position? The station contains the primary military academy for the Galactic Alliance. Loss of this facility would significantly impact our ability to train future officers. Then, we fight, Lee said simply. Admiral Zethok was monitoring the approaching enemy fleet. Captain, the Devakri have a reputation for military efficiency. They typically capture objectives with minimal casualties on both sides. That suggests they have never fought humans before, Major Bay commented. They may not be prepared for sustained resistance. The Devakri fleet took position around the station and began their assault with precision energy weapons fire directed at defensive installations. Their attack pattern showed careful targeting designed to disable resistance without causing unnecessary destruction. They are attempting to preserve the station infrastructure, Lee observed. Standard galactic warfare assumes the objective is conquest rather than destruction. Is that not logical? Commander Veltar asked. Human warfare often prioritizes denying objectives to the enemy over preserving them for yourself, Major Bay replied. If we cannot hold the station, we ensure it has no value to whoever takes it. The first wave of Devakri ground forces breached the station's outer hull and began advancing through predetermined corridors. They moved in tight formations with supporting fire, expecting to encounter token resistance before the defenders surrendered. Instead, they found themselves in carefully prepared killing zones where human-designed crossfire patterns inflicted heavy casualties. The alien attackers had never experienced defensive positions designed to maximize enemy losses rather than minimize defender risk. Enemy casualties approaching 15%, Cadet Bora reported. They are requesting immediate medical evacuation for their wounded. Denied, Lee replied. Human doctrine does not recognize medical evacuation rights for active combatants in contested areas. General Kethran was shocked. Captain, denying medical care to wounded enemies violates galactic warfare conventions. Human warfare operates under different assumptions, Lee explained. Enemy wounded who might return to combat are considered ongoing tactical threats. The Devakri advance slowed as their casualties mounted. After 6 hours of fighting, they had captured only 3 sections of the station while losing over 20% of their assault force. This is unprecedented in Devakri military history, Admiral Zethok reported. They have never sustained such losses while making so little progress. Human defensive positions are designed for this outcome, Major Bay explained. We trade space very slowly while inflicting maximum damage on attacking forces. The Devakri commander requested direct communication with station leadership. General Kethron accepted the call, with Lee monitoring. General Kethron, your defenders are fighting beyond rational tactical limits, the Devakri commander stated. We offer revised surrender terms with guarantees of prisoner rights under Galactic Convention. I will relay your offer to my tactical commander, Kethron replied. Lee activated his communicator. Devakri commander, this is Captain Lee Jiho, commanding human forces. What are your surrender terms? Surrender terms? We are offering you the opportunity to surrender to us. I understand. We decline. Do you wish to discuss your surrender to human forces? The communication channel fell silent for several minutes. Finally, the Devakri commander responded. Captain, you have sustained significant casualties and control. Only a portion of this station. On what basis do you suggest we should surrender? Your forces have taken 30% casualties while failing to achieve any strategic objectives, Lee replied calmly. Human military doctrine considers this an unacceptable loss ratio. We assume you will withdraw soon. 30% casualties is not a defeat condition for Devakri forces. Then you will continue fighting until you reach our defeat condition. Threshold. What is your defeat condition threshold? Total elimination of effective resistance capability, Lee answered matter-of-factly. Another long silence followed. Captain, you are suggesting that human forces will fight until completely destroyed? If strategic objectives require it, yes. Major Bay added context. Devakri Commander, human forces have successfully defended positions while sustaining up to 90% casualties. Your current tactical approach is insufficient to achieve victory against human defensive doctrine. The Devakri assault resumed, but their tactics had changed. Instead of attempting to preserve infrastructure, they began using heavier weapons designed to eliminate defensive positions through overwhelming firepower. They are adapting to human defensive methods, Lee observed, but they still assume that enough firepower will force surrender. The battle continued for 3 more days. Human defenders implemented fighting withdrawal through prepared positions, making the Devakri pay heavily for every section of station they captured. Cadet Shinbora distinguished herself by coordinating ammunition resupply under enemy fire while maintaining accurate casualty tracking. When her unit sustained 42% casualties, she reported it as within acceptable parameters for current tactical situation. Other alien defenders watched in amazement as human personnel continued fighting effectively despite loss rates. That would have caused complete morale collapse in any galactic military force. On the 4th day, the Devakri commander contacted the station again. This time his tone was different. Captain Lee, we have captured 60% of this station.